for my own edification, it's really good to be able to have this later on too, you know?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Good to go. Yeah. So like, it's explain to me how you got into writing in the first place. Cause I'm a big fan of your band.
Oh,
Um, yeah. League of Space Pirates. Oh my God. It's
among
awesome.
a small dedicated group.
Hey, like the costumes are incredible. The music's awesome. Like I was really bummed Guar is no longer, or at least has evolved into what it is. And so, when did you get started writing in the first place? Like, I know it's probably like evenings, weekends, whenever you can, but
Um, when did I get started writing? Like this specific book?
or just in general, did you like journal as a kid? Were you always
No,
like writing?
it's funny. I have a notebook from when I was a kid where I tried to write a science fiction book, and I started it, and I got however many pages, like many pages in, and then stopped. And I don't know, like writing has definitely not been, it's not my, has not been my thing in terms of like, my go-to form of expression. I've
Sure.
always been somebody who, done visual art, and that's sort of more my comfort zone.
Hmm.
But I like to do everything. I like make music because I enjoy music so much, but it's not necessarily, I don't have any, special talent at it that was like, I'm not a prodigy of any sort. It's like, bang out stuff, sing as best I can, just do the best. But it's like finding joy in these passions. And so writing was just something that was around. And then I've done these books for my projects, like the Spell a Day books and then the Unstuck and stuff.
Sure.
Those are all I wrote, but the way I write is the way I write a letter to somebody. It's just
Do you
sort of like
do you write with somebody in like mind, or do you like speak it out,
no,
or
I think so. And this is a neurological thing, but
sure.
I hear when I read, I hear it, and when I don't have it's weird for as visual person I'm more of an auditory person in terms
Sure.
of memory and thought. So
Yeah.
like I can't remember, like I can't see a number if I look at a number, I have to say it and I hear the word in my head, but I don't see it.
Got it. Yeah.
Anyway, but what it means is that I write. It's a very
Conversational or something.
like my writing is how I hear my voice in my head.
Got you.
And I write that what I'm hearing.
Didn't
So it's a very specific form of writing.
didn't you do like a comic book with the League of Space Pirates as well? I think I remember seeing something like that.
Yeah, good memory. So
Yeah.
I worked with a couple different writers who have developed scripts over the years for comics, and I've tried to get them published and get them drawn. It's just a whole thing because I'm not a creator of comics myself. It's like having to work with other people. But I never wrote those scripts because I was always like, this is beyond me. And I guess this story has gotten long, but the answer is I have written in many ways over the years, but I've never considered myself a writer.
Mhm.
And I love reading and I love science fiction especially, but I never thought I could write it because I kind of just, I don't know how these stories end. I don't know how these details, like I read a book and I'm like, how on earth did they do that? And so what happened is that the Space Pirates project is 20 years old. And so there's 20 years of collaborations with people who have come up with great ideas.
That's awesome.
And built on this very small seed that I planted about literally just a name and then a very little idea that other people developed. And then I kind of glommed on more ideas too. And then every time a new collaborator
snowballs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I've got an entire universe, 20-year developed universe.
That's so crazy.
I'm the only person who knows all of it. Every other person only knows a piece of it. So I kept having to explain it to people. I built a wiki at one point to just keep track of it. I brought all these writers on to write short stories.
Sure.
I wrote one short story, and then like all these other people read all these other great short stories. And I said, "Oh, you're all canon." And then I was like, they're doing their own thing, and within this universe, which felt really fun. Like there's a lot to play with here. And so I kept telling people, well, here's the big storyline. Like in my head, there was a big storyline of all the stuff we would do, the performances, the videos, everything was there was a big story arc.
Okay, got it.
And a lot of the stuff we would do in performances didn't correlate. Like they'd be like, we can time travel. I'm like, no, we can't. Like not in my story. But I think of it like any of those properties, like, a Spider-Man, whatever character where it's like, there's a lot of versions of it. And you might see the more childlike, playful version. You might see the,
Got it.
the one that's made for kids, the one that's the dark, gritty Batman. There's the.
But you built a community around it. Really, that was kind of the thing. Is like you were like, all right, League of Space Pirates. Like I'm going to start this band. It's going to be a thing. It's going to be fun, and we're going to make costumes.
And
it's going to.
I was never meant to be a thing by myself. Like, it was
Cool.
always going to be a collaborative thing. It was always about having fun with other people. It was a
Yeah.
sandbox you could play in,
Yeah.
and then watch what people develop. And the fact is, like, the things got developed that I would never have imagined being a part of it. I mean, there's, you know,
That's super
central
cool.
characters now that were entirely created from me saying, I'd like a puppet in the show. And the guy who developed the puppet was like, well, who's going to puppeteer it? I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, I said, you want to do it? He said, yeah. And then a character got developed that's wholly unique. And the
Is that the robot?
Yeah, that's Pickles. And,
okay.
You know, I mean, even his name, like everything about it, like I've gotten a big, it's actually an olive barrel. We called it a pickle barrel that we put him on top of initially, and he would hide inside of to puppet it. And so we started calling him Pickles. And so then he decided that the designation would be P1KLS because it looked like the word pickles.
Okay.
You know, so everything about it is so organic in a way that I think if I were to sit down and write a science fiction story from scratch,
yeah,
I'd be like, I have to make a million decisions. Whereas in this version, a lot of decisions have been made, but then I can make my own. Anyway, so all this is to say, we developed all this content. I had a story arc in my head. I knew I kind of wanted to get from A to B to C. I'd had a friend a long time ago write a comic book script for it that had some good ideas in it and we never used. And I was kind of like, I never let go of these ideas because I thought they were essential to the story. And so I kind of took all these pieces, and what happened is I had an idea. I was on a business trip to New York, and on walking on the subway one day, I had a vision of a scene. Because one of the things that had happened is I'd been given a glove to wear by the guy who made Pickles.
Like a Michael Jackson style thing?
Like, yeah, this weird sort of power glove.
Oh, like Nintendo.
And there was no reason for it. It was just sort of like a cool thing. And I was like, yeah, this looks cool, but why do I have this? And so then I decided, like, oh, I have this because we had this idea about embedded tech. And so I was like, because he's getting this tech removed because he wants to fight against Uber Corp and he doesn't want to have it in him. So he's got it removed. And he goes to some crappy place to do it, and they do a bad job, and his hand is messed up, and so he has to get this glove. And so I kind of like wrote this scene, and then I sat on it for a couple of years because I didn't have any other ideas. And then I had another vision about like how a book could start with that scene and then develop from it. And then it kind of happened very fast. So it was like, you know, 2 years ago, wrote this scene. Yeah. Nothing happened. Kept thinking about it. And then the pandemic happens. My band can't rehearse. I have no outlet for this stuff.
Right.
A year of that goes by. I mean, I didn't start till February. And then in February was like, I built up enough pressure that this has to come out. And I started writing down notes about like, well, what would happen? Like, what's the story? Like, so I wrote sort of like beats. So I was like, okay, from here to here to here to here to here. And I was like, well, what kind of story is this? I said, okay, it's a heist. What happens in a heist story? You got to have this and this, and that. Okay, so the big heist is this one, but what do we have? We need 2 more heists that have to happen before. So then
you assemble the crew.
Yeah, you assemble the crew, right? And it made sense because like I need to introduce a lot of characters. So okay, let's get a bunch of backstories in and do point of view stuff. And so I kind of like knew this, and then what I did was I just kept inserting more and more elements into it until I built out an outline. Okay, this is the book. I know where it ends. I know where it begins. I know a bunch of the beats inside. I don't know exactly how everything gets everywhere.
Okay. Do you have like a twist or anything that you had in mind?
I was like, I think because there's enough stuff, I knew I could always insert things.
Right.
There was a couple, and then what happened is as I started writing, I would reference all this stuff that had been done previously, and I would run into things like, oh, right, we talked about this historical moment. Let me look at this up, and I would find this article and be like, oh, this is really cool. I want to include this.
From the past 20 years of like creating the characters and everything. Yeah.
So, or even things like, reminding myself of books I liked and then being like, oh, there's a clever thing that they did in Hitchhikers, or there's a clever thing they did in Ubik. And I was like, oh, I want to do that, where these ads because they've done all this stuff over this century. So let me put that in there. And so, I just kept pulling pieces and it just sort of would slot together. And I wrote mostly sequentially. Like I really started at the beginning and wrote forward, and then I would just sort of keep going back, and then I would sort of do.
Do you ever get blocked by different stuff?
What would happen is I sometimes just wouldn't know how I would get from here to there. And then usually what would happen was I would discuss it with somebody who was in the band about it, or my family, or even my daughter who's 8, and she would come up with a great idea.
Were you like telling her the story as it went along?
The story and say, well, here's where I got stuck. What would happen next? And she might say something really random, but it would kind of get me thinking again about, oh, how could that work? Maybe that would work. Like one time I was like, well, they've got this device. I don't know what it looks like. She's like, it's got a black glow. And I was like, what's a black glow? Like, how is that even possible? Like, it's
so good.
I was like, I'm putting that in the book. And so I was like, okay, it has a black glow. It actually does the inverse of glowing. It makes light disappear around it. So, like stuff like that where you're like, that's a great idea. So kind of there was a lot of room for that in it. And then I kind of gave myself license. I said, even though we built this universe, even though there's tons of stuff in it, I'm going to give myself permission to write my version. This is like my version of Batman. Like, they don't all have to be everything that's ever existed. The show doesn't have to be the same as the book.
Right.
The show is very silly. The book is not. The book is funny in moments, but it's a more serious story. And one of the things that became super central to the story was actually a thing that never existed in any form. I literally had an idea. I don't know where it came from. Honestly, I wish I could even say. I just know that while writing it, I kind of wrote one little thought, like, oh, what if he has this like emotion inhibitor thing installed?
Oh, interesting.
To deal with this emotional pain, and that causes this thing. I knew I needed to have a sort of issue around him being
Right,
misguided.
character development, something
like,
something
character
wrong
needs to be misguided and
Yeah.
dealt with. And I was like, how would he have this? And so I had this device ended up being a thing that allowed the story to work. And it was a device that didn't exist before this very specific story. And so that was like the joy of writing, was discovering things in the process and realizing
That's
that you
cool.
don't have to do it all in advance. Like, as much as I built out all those beats, a lot happened organically while writing.
Yeah.
A lot of things happened where I was like, oh, I realized 3/4 way through I haven't given any senses, so I need to go back and put sounds and smells and
Right.
tastes.
Right.
Okay, let me insert those. Or I was really like, oh, I don't like. Clearly, I'm not somebody who writes conversation easily, so I left them out. And I was like, I got to go back in and add these conversations. I just said they did this, and then this happened. I was like, what's the conversation? Okay, let me go back.
Yeah, and like filling it in as you go. It's cool that you really leaned on the community and all of the development that happened over time. Was there anything kind of challenging about that though? Like, was there anything about like talking to other people about your book that you were like, I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to approach this or anything like that?
The risk more for me was that people get excited and really want to solve the problems, and I kind of want to. It's my baby, right? I want to be
Sure.
like I want to do, and so like the push pull on there. And I think most people are cool about it. They know it's not their thing. So like one of my friends was spooling out crazy stuff that was awesome. Steven, again, he's just like amazing. I mean, he could write his own sets of books about it. And I kind of would be like, I need an answer to this specific issue. What's a problem you could solve like this? And he'd say, okay, well, this, but then they could do that, and then they could do that, and he would take it 12 steps further and go, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to go back to the seed and maybe only use one piece of it. And I think just making clear to him that, like, I wasn't going to use everything you shared with me, but
Right.
this is great inspiration, and I'm thinking a lot now, and this is great. And I think so mostly was sort of how to rein that stuff in.
Yeah. And
like,
what was the balance between like your inspiration, like the sci-fi books you read as a kid or the influences you pulled in and stuff like that, and then your own like creativity? I know it's kind of like remixing a lot of stuff. It's pulling in new things. It's
I think, I think I always wanted to make sure that I didn't copy anything verbatim. But what I did do was reread a recent book that I really felt like, I was looking for a style of writing that felt right to me. And I read a book relatively recently, this author, Becky Chambers. She's written a bunch of really great sci-fi books that are, first of all, it's a woman writing sci-fi. It's got, it's not about war and violence as much as more about interpersonal relationships. I just thought it was like, it's her books deal with aliens, which mine don't, but like sort of just diversity, inclusion, all the stuff that's important right now. And I thought she addressed it all really well, and in a very playful, fun way that felt like there's pathos, but there's also, it's not just endlessly grim and serious. I thought she struck a great balance. So I reread one of her books. Actually, I reread it. I read them all, and then I reread one of them before I did my second pass, just to remind myself how she did things structurally. Because I think part of it is when you're writing, you're like, how do people do this? Like, they said, he said, she said over and over, or do you use other words? Like, how do you indicate that you change scenes but not chapters? Like, just structural stuff. And so what I did was I read her book again, trying not to get engaged in the story because I knew the story, and just trying to look at how she functionally did it. Like, when did you include or not include a conversation? When did you feel okay to like not give someone's perspective? When did you change viewpoints? Did you do it midway through a chapter, or did you keep the whole chapter in one view? And this is just one writer, and she's obviously a relatively young writer in terms of like the history of science fiction. So she's also influenced by other people.
Right.
I reread Hitchhiker's Guide with my daughter not too long ago, and that's definitely where my sense of humor came from. I can see it in those books, like, oh my gosh, I got so much from these. I think my goal was to not read them too close to while I was writing, so that I wouldn't accidentally feel like,
yeah, you were
like
trying to be Douglas Adrian,
if I put something in it from these, it's because it was or just authentically in me,
yeah,
versus like, oh, I'm replicating something. And so afterwards, if I reread them and I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally ripped off this thing, I'd be like, how closely did I rip it off? Like one time I found out I named a character very similar to another character. I was like, I'm going to change that name because I don't want somebody to think I was pulling that character.
Got it.
Really was just a random name, but it turns out maybe I pulled it from them without thinking about it.
Sure.
You know, that kind of stuff. But I think that, you know, if you've seen everything as a remix, I mean, it all comes from other sources. I don't feel any obligation to be like, this is a wholly original work that no one's ever had any of these ideas. Science fiction, genre fiction, I mean, it is all about a million things people have already thought of. And it's really just like, what's my unique conglomeration of
it? I find your tone, especially with like your writing or your band and stuff like that, it's hilarious. And it could be really, really dark because it's like UberCorp rules the universe. And then it's these space pirates that are like rallying against that and everything like that. So like, how did you strike this good balance of like, this is pretty dark. It could just go like off the rails, like really, really dark, depressing, everything like that. But the characters themselves, the things they say and do are hilarious. It's just ridiculous.
That's entirely credited to those performers. Like the band is its own entity, and I think left to my own devices, I probably would fall in a little more of the serious category. As much as I like humor, I'm not a humorist or a comedy writer. Mm-hmm. But the band is I think as a group, you know, group dynamics creates what it creates, and so the group creates a very funny, very silly thing, and that's everybody's personalities jiving. And I think what I've done with the book is tried to grab the best of everybody's sort of stuff and make sure it's included. But that's what's great, is as characters, you know, one of the things I felt a little bad about writing this book was that it's a little heavily weighted towards male characters than female. Mm-hmm. And there's more, you know, at least visibly white looking people, which in the book doesn't matter as much because we can change that. But, you know, in the end, like, I'm not going to change these characters too far from who they are in the band because I want it to still relate.
Sure.
And so on one hand, it's like, oh, these exist already. Like, I can't, you know, trying to explain to people, like, I didn't have a equal balance of men and women because there isn't an equal balance of men and women in the group. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I have these real specific personalities that I could draw in that's them. You know, like, you know, the parrot is the parrot that we have in our group. The Pickles is 100% Pickles' voice. Like, when I write, I'm writing in his voice. And that is cool because it allows me to retain some of that comedy that maybe I wouldn't. And I think, you know, having especially Pickles and Rusty, those two characters are so silly. They're the, you know, R2D2, C3PO, you know, you've got your comic relief sort of element that allows you to have this random thing. And I think what's important is that what I like about Space Pirates as a universe, because it's so organic, is that it keeps it from being formulaic in the book. Like, you're going to be like, well, why on earth did you add that extra character? There's no reason Pickles needs to be part of the team. But he is. And so that just throws a wrench into it and makes it more like real life, which is like, you don't have that much control over everything. You don't actually get to have a perfect crew that's exactly the elements you know, there's just human.
So you gave up some control so that you could have the characters kind of like play out differently.
I think it just makes it a more interesting read to be like, oh, I know what's going to happen next. Yeah. You know, like my wife and I, we watch, you know, whatever shows, and she can literally tell me dialogue because everything is so formulaic, and she's just like, they're going to say this now, or she'll just say it. And they do, and you're like, that's because there's a lot of tropes to how these things are done. And so I think your job is, as much as to like, people need familiarity and, you know, is to throw in enough noise to like make it feel unique and interesting, even though it may still be the same tropes.
Yeah.
You know? And like, I wanted to make a heist story because I think it's a great formula. And there's a very specific formula to heist stories, but you can still play with that. And I'm a big fan of, I mean, the way I teach with my corporate stuff, it's all about limitations. Like, I want a number of limitations to give me the ability to be creative within them, the bounds that like create something.
Yeah.
As a writer, you don't want a blank page. what the hell are you gonna write?
Well, you're also writing. What's interesting is like you are the main character, so you're kind of like almost writing from your own perspective. What was that kind of like? Because you're like writing through this character
Yeah.
that you played
Well,
before.
that was a big choice in the book. Was I actually decided, I am that character, but I can't be that character. I am. I mean, in the end, like that's me. That'll be the one closest to my voice.
Sure.
But I also wanted to make him a very flawed character. Like I
Mhm.
want him to ultimately be not even an anti-hero, but like in the end, I want other people to be the hero, and I want it to sort of subvert this idea of the like dude who's the leader being the hero. And so like he, yeah. So I actually changed the name slightly in the book. So in the band, it's Noah Orlock because I'm playing the character, and it was
Mhm.
easier if somebody said my first name, not to be like, who's Noah, right? So I was just like, oh, it's Noah Orlock. That way we can just fix that,
Yeah.
just make it work. But in the book, when I started writing that, I realized, oh, my name's gonna be on the cover of a book, and then the character's name Noah Orlock. I
Yeah.
feel like that feels a little much, and so I changed his name to Zen XEN, and I was like, okay, he's now a somebody else, so that freed me a little bit from feeling like this is me. And I'll never forget. I read no, I watched a show. This was so long ago.
Mhm.
It was Shatner was on a talk show talking about a science fiction book he wrote called Tech War. I'll never forget.
Shatner wrote a book.
I think he wrote
Yeah.
many
Wow. Okay.
crappy sci-fi. I never read them, but he wrote this book. I think it was his first one. It's called Tech. I'm pretty sure it's called Tech War.
Mm.
And he was on this talk show telling, and they're like, "What's the story of the book?" And he's like, "Well, the character does this, that, and the other." All of a sudden, he goes, "And then I did this, and then I did that." And I realized, right, he's the main character in the book, and he like
Oh.
partway through describing the book started using the first person.
Oh
And I was
no.
like, "Oh, right, like you have not divided yourself. Like you are this character, and I get it, but it literally, I mean, I don't. There's so much I don't remember, and that thing stuck with me forever."
Got
That
it.
he kind of got caught up in being his own character, right? Because he's Captain Kirk, and clearly this was like a Captain Kirk, light character that was
Sure.
in this book, and
Mm.
so I just felt like, oh, I need to avoid that pitfall with this character. And so, like, I don't want somebody to read it and be like, so this is your dad that you're talking about. This is your mom that you're
Mhm.
like, nope, these are not my parents. It's not me. Like,
Got
I
it.
will take from my life. I mean, here's the thing that I think that I brought to the table as I wrote it was that I put people in situations that I had been in. And I would think about, times when I was frustrated or angry or sad and been like, oh, I had that situation, and I can give them that experience because I know what happens in that circumstance.
Got it.
And I feel like the hardest part is to write things you haven't experienced because, I'm not that other thing, and I don't want to misrepresent that other thing or pretend to know that.
What do you think makes for really good science fiction? Because like I'm sure you're a fan. You read tons of science fiction books. Yeah.
What makes for good science fiction? Because I try to think of the books that I've just absolutely loved. I'm actually a fan of hard science fiction. I think it's done well. I'm a big fan.
Are you talking about like The Martian and stuff like that,
like
where it's more realist?
Three Body Problem.
Yeah.
That book trilogy was amazing. But at the same time, I don't mind like a big epic space, opera either. I think I get lost in too many character names. I get lost in, like that kind of stuff. But it's really about the writing. In the end, I don't really care about the subject as much as the writing. If it's a great writer, well-written book, it could kind of be about anything, and I'd be all in.
Yeah.
I just read a phenomenal book called "This Is How You Lose the Time War." I think is what they call it.
Okay.
Or "This Is How You Lose the Time War."
Is that like a Timothy Zahn kind of thing?
No. This is I don't even know. It's a two-author. One of those weird ones where you're like two authors.
Oh yeah.
And it's basically like so unique and different, and it's such a pleasure to read, and it's so different than the last thing I read, and like everyone I read, I'm like, what is it about that specific subject matter interests me, and the timing is right.
Yeah.
But in the end, like, is the writer good or not?
And what makes for good writing then? Like,
yeah, that's the question.
Yeah. It's a hard question. So like I guess
okay. I said one of my favorite authors of all times is Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah.
And what I like
same.
about Kurt Vonnegut is that he's not showing off. Like, I don't feel like he's trying to like impress you. I think he's not trying to like, he's writing very simple sentences with very deep ideas. And I think that you can read those books quickly. The chapters are short. You don't get that confused, and yet it's profound. And I think that he is a brilliant person that can use simple words to make profound statements. And
Mm.
I cherish that. I definitely use a lot more big words because I relish, I love language, and I like to
Unique
throw in a lot
words
of
and cool
words.
stuff.
But
Yeah.
it's fun for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want the reader to be like, "Who is this guy?" Like, you don't want to put in so many words that they're like, "I don't know what those words are." But at the same time, like, I want to play with language. I enjoy it. I'm, what's great about science fiction is you don't have to make literary novels, right? Everyone's accepting that there's genre and that
Mm-hmm.
they can be kind of trashy, and you're going to like it anyway. I just read Gideon the Ninth. Was it Gideon the Ninth or Hera the Ninth? Whichever the first one in that series
Mm-hmm.
is. And it's kind of terribly written, but it's a page turner. And I blasted through, that thing was a lot of pages. And I blasted through it. It was so much fun and a total mess. And I still gave it a good rating because, like, hey, you got me on it. I had fun. The writing was hilarious and terrible. And what made that a good book? Like, good ideas, intriguing concepts, and some funny stuff. And then, like, on the other hand, like, there were literally parts where I was like, a character vanished. There was a scene where a character just wasn't there anymore, and I read this page 3 times and couldn't figure out where that character went. Like, I was like, no one edited this. Like, I was like, I don't know what happened here.
do you have an editor? Like, what is the development
Not yet.
process like?
The process for me, so I've never written a novel before, and the
Mhm.
process is, so what I did is I wrote to my agent because I published books before.
Sure,
I
sure,
said,
sure.
how do you write a science fiction book? And she said, you write the whole thing. I was like, okay. And I said, I'm working with an outline. She said, that's good. A lot of people don't get lost.
Mm-hmm.
So the outline she thought was a good thing. She said, write the whole thing. Don't share it with anybody. Sit on it for a month if you can hold out, for at least a couple weeks. Edit it yourself. You're going to be your best editor. Then share it with beta readers. And I did some research on how many to have, and the best information I got was an odd number.
Wait, what does that mean? Like
Well, because
3 or like 17?
I would say less than a
Primes,
dozen.
only primes. All right, got
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Only prime number. Less than a dozen. And what the suggestion was is, in the end, what she told me, for her at least, and I did that with everybody in the end, was I didn't give anybody. I was going to ask a bunch of questions like, "What do you think of this, that?" She said that's just going to lead people on to think about things. Just get their feedback. What do they think? And I told people when I gave it to them, I'm not looking for you to do any type editing, like line editing. Just, did it make sense? Like, did you like it? What you like? What you didn't like? Whatever. And I gave it to people who I thought of as, avid readers who didn't necessarily know the story already, who would give me kind feedback, but that might still have a little critical element to it. It wouldn't be like brutal, and it wouldn't
Right.
be, stranger. And
Do you give it to like your wife or something, or is it more like?
Read it, but I think she hasn't read it yet. And I don't think she'd be the best critic of it anyway. But
Yeah.
I gave it to a person in my book club who's just a great reader but not a science fiction fan.
Mm-hmm.
I gave it to a friend who reads like a gajillion books and reviews them all, like on Goodreads, and I was like, she'd be a good reader. I gave it to more women than men. Interestingly, I think that makes sense because I am trying to look for a little more of a broader audience with my book.
Is it giving it to people you think would be the audience? Is that kind of?
I think I think so. I mean, I think obviously, if you don't like science fiction at all, you're going to be not a great. You're going to be like my friend who's an avid reader but not a big science fiction reader. She was like, I was a little confused in the beginning with which is the story, the world building stuff that you need to have there, and I think she's just not used to a book like that. She's used to books jumping into the existing world where you don't have to necessarily do that. She's like, it really picked up when this started happening. I was like, well, that makes sense, but I needed to build it that way. So with beta readers, you don't have to take all their feedback as criticism that you need to apply. You can pick and choose. And what I got from what I read about beta readers was like, you just want an odd number because if there becomes a thing where like a certain number of people start telling you do X, Y, Z, if it's split evenly between two camps,
right, you don't know what to do. Yeah.
But if it's odd number, at least you could be like, well, more people said this. That's what happened so far, and I'm still waiting on maybe 2 people to get back to me. No one's had the same feedback.
Interesting.
Which means to me that means it's all your personal response. Like, there's no structural thing that everyone's taking issue with.
Okay.
Going, I couldn't understand this character. It was like one person was like, everyone sounded the same to me. I'm like, huh. But then nobody else said that. So I'm like, well, then maybe that's how she's reading it, and she's not a sci-fi reader. So
Sure.
because I didn't think that was true, but I will go back through and read it with that in mind. Maybe I need to distinguish people
Yeah.
more from their voice. Somebody else was like, I found this part could be moved to this part. I'm like, okay, well, I'll think about it, but no one else said that. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
So, but some of them were like, hey, I love this character. I'd like to know more about them. I think there's a conversation missing. And I'm like, where is that conversation? Okay.
And then develop it more. Yeah,
I might put that in there. And I've got room right now. My word count's a little low, so there's room for more.
And what is your word count, right? Like, what are you shooting for? This was like a first draft, right?
Yeah, this is now second draft, but
Okay.
it's I was aiming for 50 to 70,000.
Okay, yeah.
And I cracked. I'm closer to 60 right now.
Okay,
but I'm a little under 60. I think I could get it over 60 with my next edit, and I don't think I'd want to be more than 70.
Got it.
And that's just to get it into a novel and not have it be a novella. But at this point, novellas seem like they're getting some play. But the story just feels like it definitely. I mean, I have a tendency to be concise, so I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't like.
Yeah, how did you find this kind of like pushed you, and do you think you would go through the same kind of process? You would do things differently? Would you do it again?
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. I finished the first draft. I sat on it for a month and did other research. I reread a book. I sort of just kept thinking about the characters and taking notes. And then when I got back to draft 2, I was excited to sort of go in and give it another pass. And I found a bunch of holes that I was like needed to fix and fill and stuff. And it was great. And then I handed off the beta readings, and it's kind of killing me because I've been waiting a couple months now for everyone to get back to me because I'm thinking more stuff. But in this last 2 months while I've been doing that, I started thinking about, well, here's what would happen after that. I started writing the second book. And I was like, okay. And then I was like, well, and to complete the arc, I'd need book 3. And I was like, okay, apparently this is a 3-book series, which I did not intend. And yet the longer it's taken me to finish this book because I'm waiting for people to get back to me, the more I've written the second book. And so I just last night finished the outline, not the outline, but sort of the beats.
Yeah, story beats and stuff like that.
Book. Yeah. And I'll start writing that probably next month.
Wow. That's cool.
I'm excited. The process was like sitting down almost every night for a month and writing for 2 to 3 hours. And that was like very productive writing. Like every night I was like very intensely writing. I might stop to check a word or to research something that I wasn't sure about, but it was very productive. And then the next night I would go back and edit what I had just written loosely just to make sure it made sense, and then start writing the next section. And you did this like linearly, and you said you like circled back to like other sections. Fairly linear, because what I would do is I'd write a chunk, and then the next day I'd reread that chunk and just make corrections if things were funky, and then kind of start into that next chunk that led right into it, kind of got me back into the right headspace. And then the only thing I would do is sometimes I might jump way ahead if I had an idea for a conversation or something, and I'd put a note there, or I might keep writing past a part where I was like, I don't know what happens here, and I just put a note, come back here and write this, and I would zoom past it so it didn't let me get stuck, and then later I'd go back and fill in the missing pieces. Yeah. So that allowed me to keep moving forward. So if I was just like, I don't know what that conversation is, I don't know how they get from here to there, I'll deal with it later. And a couple times I've written chunks that I realized, oh, that chunk should go here later. And you just rearrange, yeah. And I've cut stuff too. There was a couple nights where I wrote the whole night and then I cut the whole thing out. But what it did do was I solved some structural stuff. Yeah, you were working through it. Yeah, like I was like, oh, well, why would they be like this? Oh, because they had to have had this relationship, and that's the conversation they had. But I don't need to have that in the book. Got it. So it was like extra, like fluff. And I saved all of that. So all of that was in a separate document where I had, I could go back to it. I could be like, oh, I need that now, or what was it I wrote about? Okay, did you write in like Word? You were like writing in like Microsoft. Okay. I used Google Docs because I could write from anywhere and any device. So if I wanted to pull it up on the road or on my laptop, my home computer, I just opened it. I had a little tag to show me where I was in writing or whatever, and I threw in chapters later. I didn't put chapters in it first. The chapters were on round 2. Okay, got it. It was very logical. Once I looked at it, I was like, oh, this all makes perfect sense. Like the first go through, I was like, where the heck are chapters going to be? But they all fell in because you kind of get there's like a jump in the pacing and like different scenes. Kind of felt like, oh, this is a beat. And I also think of it very much like a movie. So I was a lot of times thinking. Were you ever involved in like film? I know you have like a creative practice normally. So like, how did that creative practice translate into your book writing? Because you said you weren't a writer before, and so now this is like a new kind of creative practice. Yeah, I mean, I've always done creative stuff. I've done some like short filmmaking. I worked for a film company. I've always been a big film fanatic. Um, so I think that like all of that adds up. You know, you kind of unconsciously get an education in how to do stuff if you're paying attention. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, in school I studied film theory a little bit and photography. You know, I studied a bunch of different stuff. So I think all of it is the same, which is like, you know, design. I was in did theater design, which is always like, what's your message? What's your audience? And how are you going to convey that audience message to that audience?
Did you
So,
figure out your like themes ahead of time too?
I said, this is the goal of the book. I
Okay.
wrote that. I said, here's my goal. Here are my beats. Here's what I'm trying to, you know, but I don't think I've necessarily gotten into, because I think part of it is left to the reader to decide.
Got it.
You have to figure out some of that stuff. But what's the purpose of writing this book? Like, what, you know, in the end, like what story am I trying to tell? And, you know, knowing that I have a lot of characters that have to exist, how do they all get brought into and woven? So like book 2, I'm basically saying like there's a lot of threads because every character needs their individual arc. So how do
So
all
you're
of
not
these,
writing it from like one perspective anymore. You
no,
like
and the
split.
first one's not from one perspective either. Like the
Oh,
captain's
interesting.
default perspective, but I allowed everyone to have their own. So the same thing will happen in this book, but you kind of got to take. I just didn't want it to feel like no one's important but this one person. Like in the end, like they're all important. He's the catalyst for them doing stuff.
Yeah.
But like he discovers that he's really also, as much as he's a catalyst, he's also problematic. And I think that book allows him to see that and some decisions to be made that the second book really builds on a different character's needs. And it's not about his needs anymore.
Oh, interesting.
So that's what book 2 will be about. And then book 3 is going to really be this whole other piece that I've had in my mind for a long time. I have no idea how it'll work out, but I know the big sort of thing. And I know that needs to happen later. So you kind of it works from the big ideas to the small.
Okay.
So I definitely, you know, I just sort of throw out, here's the big thing, then here are the medium things, and here's the smaller things, and then it gets down to the writing. The writing is the
And the
grand
details and like
yeah,
all
then
of
it
the
gets into
senses
like,
and
yeah,
like
so then you
conversations
just
and
go,
stuff. Yeah.
okay, scene 1 and book 2 is this. What happens after that?
Yeah.
Logically, they need to do this. And a lot of it is just logic. For me, the writing was like, well, if they did that, this is something that would have to happen after that.
Yeah.
They have to do that. And how would they do that? And who would be involved in that? And then how would I get from here to here?
And what's kind of cool is that the characters themselves are pretty established. Like you know a lot about these characters, and so if you put them in a room in a certain situation, you can kind of like picture how they would interact.
Yeah, you know their responses. And so I guess that, I mean, somebody who hasn't had all this back stuff built already, you have to kind of develop that. And I think I would imagine you'd want to do the equivalent, which is sort of write notes about every character and who they are and what they're about and where they're from and stuff, so that you don't have to make that up on the spot. But you can. I mean, there are definitely times where I was writing and just on the spot was like, oh, this person's like this. But you also don't have to know that much about them. You know, there's did you ever watch the new Twilight Zone?
No, I didn't see it.
There was one in the 80s, not the new one, but the 80s one. The 80s one was fantastic. But there was an episode where this person woke up, husband and wife woke up, and they woke up before their moment in time existed yet. It was still being built.
Oh, cool.
So there's all these people they were like, what is going on? There are all these people building the world, like putting, you know, things together, like putting scratches in their coffee table and stuff.
Yeah.
And then, so they start running around trying to find people because no one else is there because they're there early. And they finally find like a timekeeper who's like, oh, you're out of time. Well, now we have to sort of remove you from the timeline because of this. So they escape him and they go try to hide around a corner of a building. When they run around the corner, it's white. And it's because that wasn't built because no one was going to go in there during that moment in time.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so I think of it like that. Like, you don't have to write or even think of all of it because if it's not important to the story, it doesn't exist. And the cool thing is you can invent it later and then retroactively work it into your story where you're like, oh, that always was that way, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, that's fun, is that you leave yourself enough openings to like keep developing, but you don't have to know.
Yeah, and otherwise you kind of paint yourself into a corner sometimes too.
Yeah, you don't want to know. Yeah, so like having things you don't know as a writer is fine because while you're writing, you'll discover them, and your characters will introduce you to them, and they'll do something that you'll be, oh, well, why do they do that? Huh, that must mean this. if I logically deduce this from the actions, then this is a reality that I didn't expect.
Got it.
It's just fun. That
Yeah.
was the fun part about writing. And the weirdest thing, I guess, to explain, having now done it once, is that you don't know what you're gonna write. Like
Yeah.
you kind of, it's like you are experiencing it as you write it, which can be really cool.
So I've taken up a big chunk of your time. I know it's like at the top of the hour and we're
It
already
was
past
fun,
time.
but thank you.
Yeah, this is super cool. Yeah, there's so briefly about my story. It's kind of like a science fiction epic. It is 1,000 years after the Earth was impacted by an asteroid, and a very much in the same kind of lens. A woman witnesses a murder on Venus that has the potential of unraveling, basically destroying her planet. And so she then has to like go through a series of escape. There's like a kind of heist to steal information to figure out that there's this signal coming from Earth that has been dead for 1,000 years, and so trying to figure out what's going on Earth. And so
I'm all in.
Yeah,
I'm ready to read it.
I'm taking my background in genetic engineering and kind of applying it to a lot of the science behind it too, which is kind of cool.
That's cool.
Yeah,
because that's something I felt very like. I'm well read. I'm fairly up to date on science, but I definitely do not know stuff. And so there's parts where I was like, I'm gonna look on Google, on Wikipedia. I'm gonna do my best, and I'm gonna assume that an editor later will fix it if it's really, really wrong.
got it. Yeah,
there was a couple parts where I was like, if an airlock opens, I was like, what happened? You know, like you're like,
yeah. What's the actual process?
Would they actually fly out the door, or would it be like this? You know, like
Mhm.
there's just stuff where you're like, I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to look up people. Like it was like, oh, okay, if you use a wormhole for faster than light travel, then like,
How does that work?
how long does it take to get from
Yeah.
one place to another? You know, and I looked at the science, and they were like, well, there's 3 sort of theories about it. And I was like, okay, I get to pick one of those theories. Then that's good.
That's cool. And you kind of had to like learn and teach yourself on the go
And
too, which is awesome.
And, you know, and again, you watch enough science fiction, and you realize there's tropes that are acceptable, and there's tropes that are unacceptable.
Yeah.
You know, like learning that asteroid fields are not densely packed, and that you wouldn't be bouncing off of them, and that's ridiculous. You know, or being like, oh, you know, I know faster than light travel is impossible, so I'm not going to have that. You know, there's no. You know, you can use a wormhole as a way to get from one place to another faster than regular space travel, but you know, I want to have I want it to exist in our universe, even if it's an alternate version of our universe. I don't want to have to be in another universe where science works different.
Yeah, it's like a reality adjacent, you know.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm inserting a corporation into the past, which means that all of our timeline is different based on that. You know, existence of Ubercorp means that theoretically Apple didn't develop the way it did, or any other corporation, right? So they sort of fill that space in a way that, while other companies exist, they're going to like push things out of the way, and change history. So there's no way this is our.
So you're like when I set things up, I like set up initial conditions and then played out the timeline, you know, and like tried to figure out exactly what was happening in the world building in that kind of way. So you said you did a similar type thing with the world building.
A little bit. I mean, I think I'm allowing, again, I did a show where I had people build 150 years of history of this corporation to today.
I remember. Yeah, Gallery 5 was awesome.
So I've got all that now to be like, again, maybe not use all of it directly, but Uber Television, yes, okay, I'm going to use that. You know, the fast food restaurant, that'll come into play at some point. Like all these little things that people develop allow me to think about, what would this be like that developed over all this time. But I don't know everything that happens from now. One of the things I've been figuring out, and I'm still in the process of figuring out, is there's a big event that we call the Great Magnetic Cloud. And I don't really know what happened or how it happened. I just know that it's the device that allows me to have a future where sometimes things seem like they should have been developed. We're 400 years in the future. 400 years from now could be fairly different, but in many ways it's not. And I think it's not because of this thing. I think this thing knocked us back.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I
think it's sort of like the way the sort of dark ages sort of caused us to go backwards. You know, theoretically, if we went from the Romans to today, we should be way further. They already had toilets and
exactly.
Technology. They understood the world was round, and then we kind of lost that in the Middle Ages.
So right now it's kind of like a Deus Ex Machina, but like you could develop it more, and it's one of those things like around the corner in the white space where like you can discover it. You can kind of like
write it out. So I think maybe book 2 or book 3 might finally reveal what it is, and when it does, I'll have to solve that. There is a problem I've been setting up that I honestly don't know the answer to, that I keep hesitating on including because of that. Because I'm like, oh, that does feel like writing myself in a corner. Like as much as I want it, I'm like, if I write this, then I gotta get my way
You
out of it.
stick
I
to it.
don't know
Yeah.
if I have that answer. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm excited to read your book. If you want a beta reader, I'm glad to do it for you.
That would be
Um,
awesome, man.
and
And yeah, I can kind of send you my story beats and first chapter too if you're interested, just to get a sample, a little
yeah,
taste of it.
I'd love to see what your writing's like.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time, and
Yeah,
like
no, absolutely.
always awesome talking to you. And I'll share this little video too, just so you can see. Like if you want to pass this around to your beta readers as well, to kind of showcase like your writing process and everything like that.
Here's how it works.
Yeah.
No, this is great. I mean, it's good to talk about, and I'm excited to get to book two. So I'm actually,
Mm.
like thinking a lot about it. And frankly, my plan is like my agent is awesome, and she does deal with science fiction books. But my plan is to self-publish if a publisher doesn't want it. So I'm going to make it go in the
Interesting.
world either way.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
because, why not? Put a lot
Exactly.
of effort into it. No one wants it just as a
And
publisher doesn't
you're
want
not
it.
expecting to like this is for you really, like you're writing because you had this idea. It's kind of like to fulfill you, turning it into like a the entire business or other things like that. It's nah.
That's just gravy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Noah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and we'll catch up relatively soon. I'll ping you about some stuff, and potentially if I have challenges or problems or questions or anything like that, do you mind if I
Yeah,
message you?
send a note.
All
Okay.
right, cool. Thanks, man. All
Good to
right,
see you.
see ya.